ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। So we will continue our study of one of the most ancient philosophies and one of the most important also. Ancient not only in India but the whole world, that is the Sankhya philosophy. So right at the beginning I will just tell you what Swami Vivekananda himself has said about the importance of this philosophy. Some persons are unmuted. Please mute yourself. Some sound is coming. Yeah. So let's see what Swamiji says about how important this philosophy is. So here you can see what Swamiji says about this. He says, there is no philosophy in the world that is not indebted to Kapila. Kapila means the founder of the Sankhya philosophy. Pythagoras came to India and studied this philosophy, and that was the beginning of the philosophy of the Greeks. Later it formed the Alexandrian school and still later the Gnostic school. It became divided into two. One part went to Europe and Alexandria and the other remained in India. And out of this, the system of Vyasa was developed. The Sankhya philosophy of Kapila was the first rational system that the world ever saw. Every metaphysician in the world must pay homage to him. I want to impress on our mind that we are bound to listen to him as the great father of philosophy. This wonderful man, the most ancient of philosophers, is mentioned even in the Shruti. Shruti means the Vedas. In the Vedas it is said, O Lord, thou who produced the sage Kapila in the beginning. How wonderful his perceptions were, and if there is any proof required of the extraordinary power of the perception of yogis, such men are the proof. They had no microscopes or telescopes, yet how fine their perception was, how perfect and wonderful their analysis of things. So, this is said by none other than the great Swami Vivekananda. So we proceeded far in the study of the Sankhya philosophy. We have first discussed their theory of causation. The Sankhya maintains that the effect pre-exists in the cause in a potential condition, and that the effect is a modification of the cause. It is a manifestation, development, or just redistribution of the cause. This we have discussed, and then we discussed the nature of Prakriti, the uncaused cause of the whole universe, and then we studied the constituents of Prakriti, which are the gunas, the sattva, rajas and tamas. So today we will study Purusha, for whom Prakriti manifests the whole universe so that the Purusha can experience it and become free. Purusha, today's study will be relatively simple because Purusha is simple. Everything else is made up of parts, but the Purusha is partless. All these we will just study in a brief manner. But before that, about the Sankhya theory of cause and effects, I will show you a very interesting quote. One person from India, Mr. Joshi, he is also listening to our Sankhya classes afterwards. So when he listened to the talk on this theory of causation of the Sankhya, he sent me a very, very interesting quote of Michelangelo. I will just share it with you. It reflects so beautifully. I was amazed that, see, I think you can see this quote here. This is none other than Michelangelo. He says, every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it. See, the statue is already present in the block of stone. What does the sculptor or the efficient cause do? He discovers it first in his mind, then manifests the statue which was in the stone through his talent. He releases the statue from the stone. And the second quote you can see, I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free. See, it corresponds so beautifully with the Sankhya theory that this potential of being the angel or demon or whatever the sculptor sees inside the stone, that potential is already there in the stone. It is already there. What does the sculptor do? He releases that potential. So it is said so beautifully here. I was really amazed and I thought that I should share this with you, since it is none other than Michelangelo who said this. So we have already discussed the material cause and the efficient cause also, and Prakriti, which is the uncaused cause or the first cause of the universe. Prakriti is unmanifested, that is why it is called Avyakta. It is not primal matter because it is the ground of all modifications, physical and psychical. It is the root cause of matter, life and mind. And from Prakriti the whole universe is evolved. And who gives the seed of evolution in the Prakriti? Who starts this process? It is none other than God himself. As we saw in the Gita, my womb is the great nourisher of the Prakriti. In that I place the seed. From that, O Arjuna, occurs the birth of all beings. And this Prakriti is made up of three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. All the three gunas bind us. They bind the Purusha to the Prakriti. Sattva binds through happiness and knowledge. Rajas binds through activity. Tamas binds through laziness and indolence. So our work is to break the shackles of the gunas and become free. We who are the Purushas should realize that Prakriti is only for our experience. And therefore, after we have finished experiencing it, we have to break the shackles and finally become free and regain our true nature. This is the function of the Prakriti, and this is the function of the Sankhya philosophy, to make us aware of this and set us free. So, what is the nature of the Purusha or the self? As we have already seen, Sankhya admits of two ultimate realities. What are the two? Prakriti and Purusha. So, we have already discussed Prakriti. The second type of ultimate reality admitted by the Sankhya is the self or the Purusha. So, existence of the self must be admitted by all. Actually, even in support of the existence of the Purusha, the Sankhya gives very beautiful arguments which you will see now. But to put it in a simpler way, the existence of the self must be admitted by all actually. Because everybody feels and asserts that he or she exists. And that we always say, this belongs to me, that belongs to me. So if I am not there, whom does this belong to? First is I, then comes mine. The feeling of one's own existence is the most natural experience that we all have. Only after we feel that we exist can we do anything. Suppose we wake up in the morning and we have no feeling at all of our existence, then how can we proceed? But this very statement, you see, just see the interesting point. Just this very statement that I am not aware of my existence is contradictory. Because who's saying this? If I say I am not aware of my existence, who's saying this? I am saying this. So if we say that we are not aware of our existence, it is a contradiction. Because as soon as I say I, this means I am aware of my existence. So the self cannot be denied by anybody, because if someone denies, that very denial proves that that someone exists. Otherwise, how will he deny it? Who is denying? So self has to be admitted. The existence of self cannot be contradicted by any means. So this is the general argument regarding the existence of the self, but as you know, we have already studied so many philosophies. There is a wide divergence of opinion about its nature. The most material philosophy which we studied, Charvaka, they say that the self is nothing but the gross body. And when the gross body is burnt or buried or decomposes, then the self vanishes. This is one view. Then we studied Buddhism. Buddhists say that the self is identical with a stream of consciousness. The stream of consciousness is what is called the self. Then the Nyaya Vaisheshika says that self is an unconscious substance which may acquire consciousness under certain conditions, like when it is joined to the mind, etc. And the Mimamsakas, we have not studied Mimamsa, we will take it up later. Mimamsakas say that self is a conscious entity which is partially hidden by ignorance. And Advaita Vedanta says that the self is pure eternal consciousness which also is blissful. Sat, Chit, Ananda. So, Ananda aspect also is an essential part of the self. Now, the Sankhya theory of the Purusha won't be difficult at all for us, because it corresponds almost exactly with the Advaita theory. Almost exactly. There is only one small point in which it differs, that Sankhya says that although the self is consciousness itself, it is not blissful consciousness. Ananda Swarupa, that Advaita Vedanta says. But the Sankhya says that Ananda and consciousness are different. Since Ananda, bliss, and the consciousness are different, they cannot be the essence of the same reality. So, Sankhya says that self is pure consciousness, which Advaita Vedanta agrees, but when Vedanta says that it is blissful consciousness, Sankhya doesn't agree to that. In this very minor point they differ, but otherwise it is more or less exactly the same concept. So, we can understand easily. So the self is different from the body and the senses and the mind. It is not anything of the world. It is not the brain, nor the nervous system, nor the aggregate of conscious states. It is a conscious spirit which is always the subject of knowledge and can never become the object of any knowledge. Nobody can say that I see the self, like I see this phone, I see the self in the same way, I see this computer, I see the self in the same way. Nobody can say. Because who will say? The self, the witness is the only one who can see. So if the self is objectified, who else is there to witness the self? What can see the eye? The eye sees everything. No organ can see the eye. We can see the eye only in a reflection. Similarly, the knower cannot be known like any outside object. So, the self is always the eternal subject. And consciousness is its very essence. Just like Advaita Vedanta. So the light of the self's consciousness remains the same, although the objects of knowledge may change. The object may change. I may see a lamp, I may see a computer, I can see this sofa here. Objects are changing, but the light of consciousness, which cognizes all this, that never changes, and that is the light of the self. So it is a steady, constant consciousness in which there is neither change nor activity. Even when we sleep, in deep sleep, the self is the witness. Actually, we witness that sleep. We don't actually sleep. It is a wonderful analysis of when we study the three states. In Advaita Vedanta, it is simply unbelievable the way they have analyzed this waking, dream and deep sleep states. Advaita Vedanta says that just by analyzing these three states, we can gain the knowledge of the Atman. So it's a beautiful analysis. Here I'd just like to mention that we should be aware that the deep sleep state is also actually witnessed by us. That is why when we wake up, we say sometimes, oh, I had a very good sleep. When we say, I had a very good sleep, who says this? If I was one with the sleep, then I couldn't know the sleep was good or bad. To know something which is good or bad, I must be separate from that, no? Anyway, we can later discuss in detail. It's a wonderful analysis. So this is the thing. So self is uncaused, eternal and all-pervading. Just like Prakriti. Prakriti is also uncaused, eternal and all-pervading. So what is the main difference between the Prakriti and the self? The main difference is Prakriti is Jada, inert, while the self is Chetana, conscious. These two are ultimate realities. But Prakriti is inert, while the self is conscious. That is the difference, most important difference between them. Other differences are there which we will see. So all change and activity, all pleasures and pains belong really to matter and its products like the body, mind and intellect. It is ignorance to think that the self is the body or the senses or the mind and the intellect. It is ignorance to think like that, but we are always thinking like that. That is why we are in ignorance. When the tooth aches, we have to run to the dentist. When the stomach aches, we have to go to the gastroenterologist. Tooth came to my mind first because just recently I have had a tooth extraction and I suffered for 1 week in pain. So that is our condition. We are always mixing up ourselves with the mind and body. So through ignorance, when the self confuses itself with any of these things, mind, body, etc., it seems to be caught, seems, mind you, it is never caught actually. It seems to be caught up in the flow of changes and activities and becomes entangled, becomes submerged in the mire of sorrows and miseries. This is the thing. This is the whole problem, that the self is identifying itself with matter, with Prakriti. So, we have already discussed one general proof of the self, that nobody can really deny that he or she exists, but the Sankhya doesn't stop with that. It gives some beautiful arguments in support of the existence of the self. What are these arguments? We will discuss 4 of them. The first, which is the most important and the often quoted argument of the Sankhyas, is that in Sanskrit it is called Sanghata Pararthatvat. Sanghata means what? Sanghata means all the objects of the world are a collection of parts. Everything you see in the world is a collection of parts. Even atoms have parts. Even those parts of the atoms have parts. So, all these things are Sanghata, and they say that Sanghata is Parartha. Parartha means they are means to the ends of some other being. They have to be the means to the end of something else. Their existence, if something made up of parts exists, it has to be for the sake of something else. So all the things in the universe, chairs, tables, etc., they are all made up of parts. And they exist only to serve the purpose of someone else, which is conscious. And they must be quite different and distinct from that whose purpose they serve. So, all physical objects are actually made up of parts, and they serve the end of someone else because they cannot be an end in themselves. Because if they have to be the ends of someone else for the purpose of someone else, that someone else has to be conscious. If I use a pen, if I use anything physical, I have to be conscious. The table cannot use the pen because both are unconscious. So all objects of the world, we know that they are for the purpose of living beings. Non-living things can never make use of living things. So this is the first argument. Sanghata Pararthatvat means all these objects which are made up of parts are meant for someone else who is conscious. So this proves the existence of the Purusha, which is the only thing which is conscious. Second argument we all are familiar with more or less. It says that all material objects, including the mind and the intellect, are inert. So inert objects cannot function by themselves. They have to be controlled and directed by some intelligent principle in order for them to function properly, so that they can be of some use. Like a machine or car does its work only when it is under the guidance of some person. Of course, if you say that now there are self-driven cars, but the self-driven car also has been guided and manufactured by human beings. A car cannot manufacture a car. A conscious entity has to be behind all these unconscious things. So self has to be there to guide the operation of Prakriti and all her products. This is the second argument. The third argument is all objects of the world are capable of producing pleasure, pain and indifference. Actually, they are of the nature of pleasure, pain and indifference because they are made up of gunas. And the characteristics of gunas is pleasure, sattva guna, pain, rajoguna and indifference, tamoguna. So all these are capable of producing pleasure and pain and indifference, but pleasure and pain have meaning only if they are experienced by some conscious being. Who experiences this? If there is nobody to experience pleasure and pain, how can the existence of pleasure and pain be proved at all? Pleasure and pain we know exist. Why? Because we experience them. So all the objects of the world are constituted of pleasure, pain and indifference, but there has to be some conscious subject or self who enjoys and suffers pleasure and pain. Actually not the self, because we have to say in Sankhya selves in plural, because the Sankhya says that there are infinite number of selves. Here it differs from Advaita Vedanta. We will come to that. This is the third proof, and the fourth proof we all know that all seekers after liberation, all those who seek mukti in this world, of course there are very few, so they make a sincere effort to attain final release from all kinds of suffering. So only a conscious entity can feel suffering, and only a conscious entity can make efforts to be free from suffering. An unconscious entity cannot suffer or cannot enjoy. So this experience of pain and pleasure or suffering is not possible for anything of the physical world, because by its very nature the physical world actually causes suffering, does not relieve it. So there must be some immaterial substance or substances which transcends the Prakriti or physical universe. Otherwise, the concept of liberation or salvation, which is found in saints and sages, would be meaningless. So these are the four very potent arguments of the existence of selves. I will now go into plural because we are studying the Sankhya, which admits of many selves. So there is not, as the Advaita Vedantin says, one universal self pervading all bodies. On the other hand, Sankhya says we must admit a plurality of selves, which is each of which is connected with one body. So, myself is different, Sankhya says it is connected with my body. Yourself is different, it is connected with your body. His self is different because it is connected with his body. This is a great difference between Sankhya and Vedanta. So, in short, let us discuss the characteristics of Purusha now. First, Purusha is conscious, Chetana. It is the eternal subject. It can never be the object of any knowledge. It is the eternal witness or the Sakshi. It is the eternal seer or the Drashta. The conscious self is the only seer. The Prakriti is Drishya, that which is seen, and the self is Drashta, which is the seer. An unconscious object can never be the seer. If I witness something, I see something, I must be conscious. So Prakriti shows its effects and modifications to the self, which is their eternal witness. The self is the witness to which the buddhi shows its mental states. Actually, the self is witnessing the mental states, pain, pleasure, etc. But the problem is when the self identifies itself with those states, it says that I am happy, I am sad. The self is never happy or sad. It is beyond all these. It is the witness of the mental states but confuses itself with the mental state. It forgets it is the witness. So it is inactive but appears to be active again owing to its connection with the buddhi. The buddhi works, the brain works. The self thinks that I am thinking, I am doing. But the buddhi or the brain is unconscious. It only appears to be conscious owing to its connection with the Purusha. Just like the moon does not have any light, but it appears glowing because the light of the sun falls upon it. So the buddhi also, the mind also appears to be conscious only because the light of the self is being reflected on it. So Purusha is conscious but inactive. And like Prakriti, it is all pervading. It is devoid of movement because it is all pervading. If something is everywhere, then where can it go? So it appears to have movement just because it is identifying itself with matter. That's all. It is completely indifferent. It is free from pleasure, pain and delusion. Why? Because there are no gunas in the self. The gunas are responsible for pleasure, pain and indifference. But they are the constituents of Prakriti, not of the self. The self is completely free from the gunas. So it is free from attachment and aversion. It is distinct from the gunas and Prakriti. It is actually entirely free from the entanglements of Prakriti. So it is Nitya Shuddha, Buddha and Mukta. Nitya Shuddha. Shuddha means pure. It is ever pure because it is untainted by the least touch of Prakriti. Buddha, always awakened. Awakened means it is conscious. And Mukta, Nitya Shuddha Buddha Mukta, which the Advaita Vedanta says to describes of the self, is also true of the Purusha of the Sankhyas. Only problem is it confuses itself with the Buddhi, and when this confusion is gone, by long sadhana, by grace of God, then Purusha realizes its intrinsic freedom. So it is the eternal knower or the seer. But it is not inert, it is conscious. That is the main difference between Prakriti and Purusha. But there are some other differences also. So what are those differences? Actually, Prakriti and Purusha are of a completely opposite nature. Prakriti is composed of the gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Purusha is absolutely free from the gunas. Prakriti is an aggregate of the gunas. Purusha is simple. It is not made up of any parts. Prakriti is always the object of knowledge. Purusha is always the subject of knowledge. Prakriti is common to many persons, but Purusha is different in different bodies according to Sankhya. Prakriti is non-intelligent or unconscious. Purusha is intelligent or conscious. Prakriti is productive. It produces the whole matrix, whole universe. Purusha is non-productive. It does nothing. It is not subject to modification at all. Prakriti is uncaused. Purusha is also uncaused, mind you. But Prakriti, though uncaused, is the cause of the whole universe. But Purusha is uncaused and it is never the cause of anything else. Because it is unchangeable and immutable. To be the cause of something else, you have to change. You see, if the threads are made into a cloth, the thread changes into the cloth. If you say, I will not change the thread at all, then how can you make a cloth out of it? So, because the Purusha is unchangeable, it is never the cause of anything. Prakriti is active, Purusha is inactive. So, it is constant and beyond all mutations. This is the thing. So, this in short is the difference between Prakriti and Purusha. So, just before ending, we will again see Swami Vivekananda has dealt with this Sankhya philosophy in some detail. So we will just see the light which he has thrown upon the nature of the Purusha. The same things are said, but in a different and very beautiful and simple language by Swamiji. So we will just see. Swamiji says, as we have seen, that Prakriti is insentient. It is a compound and insentient. Then Swamiji says a very interesting thing, that wherever there is law, if there is any law which exists, it is proof that the region of its play is insentient. This is a very beautiful concept. Wherever there is the existence of law, we should know that law means bondage. See, when we are put under law means what? Our freedom is curtailed. It is all for the good of the society, the law which exists in the society, that is true. But law means lack of freedom. Whether it is for the good or the bad, that is different. So, wherever there is law, we should realize that something insentient is there, which can be held under law. For example, if there is a law, suppose if there is a lockdown due to the COVID, so it is the law that nobody can go out now. Now the law pertains to whom? The law pertains to me, but only to my mind and body, because they are insentient. The law cannot pertain to Purusha, because it is already all pervading. it can be put under no law. So Swamiji makes this beautiful observation that wherever there is law, it is proof that the region of its play is insentient. Purusha can never be under any law. It is free. So mind, intelligence and will and everything else is insentient. But they are all reflecting the sentiency or the chit of some being who is beyond all this. Sat Chit Ananda. Chit denotes the sentiency of the Atman. So the Purusha is the cause of all the changes in the universe, but it itself is uncaused. So Swamiji says that is to say, this Purusha, taking him in the universal sense, can be said to be the God of the universe. Then Swamiji says the Purusha is not will, neither can it be intelligence, because intelligence itself is a compound. There cannot be any intelligence without some sort of matter corresponding to the brain. Wherever there is intelligence, there must be something akin to the matter which we call brain. Without brain, there can be no intelligence. So there must be some matter which we call brain, which becomes lumped together into a particular form and serves the purpose of the brain. Wherever there is intelligence, there must be matter in some form or the other. But intelligence itself is a compound. What then is this Purusha? Swamiji says it is neither intelligence nor will, but it is the cause of all these. It is the presence that sets them all going and combining. It does not mix with nature. It is not intelligence or Mahat. Mahat is the one of first product of Prakriti. When we study the evolution of the universe, next time maybe, then we will see what all these terms mean. Mahat, Buddhi, Ahankara, etc. So it is not Mahat or the intelligence, but the self, always pure and the eternal witness. Okay. So next Swamiji says, wherever there is pleasure and pain and light in the universe, actually that attraction, when we get joy from something, Swamiji says that it is because of the Purusha. Wherever there is any happiness, wherever there is any bliss, there is a spark of that immortality which is God. So Purusha, Swamiji says, is the great attraction of the universe, though untouched by and unconnected with the universe. Yet it attracts the whole universe. This is the mystery. So Swamiji says, you see a man going after gold. Why? Because behind the gold there is a spark of the Purusha, though mixed up with a good deal of dirt. Dirt here means Prakriti. When a man loves his children or a woman or husband, what is the attractive power? A spark of the Purusha is behind them. It is there, only mixed up with dirt. What is the dirt? Mind and body. Because Swamiji says, nothing else can attract us. Wherever we feel attraction, there the Purusha exists. In this world of sentiency, the Purusha alone is sentient. In this world of insentiency, the Purusha alone is sentient. This is the Purusha of the Sankhyas. As such, it necessarily follows that Purusha must be omnipresent. That which is not omnipresent has to be limited. All limitations are caused, and that which is caused must have a beginning and end. So if the Purusha becomes limited, it will die it will not be free, will not be final, but have some other cause also. Therefore, it is omnipresent, it is unlimited. And there are infinite number of Purushas, and it is neither mind nor matter that we have seen. So, this omnipresent Purusha does not have birth or death. Nature is casting her shadow upon it, the shadow of birth and death, but by its nature it is pure. So, Kapila's psychology says that the soul is infinite. It is the only thing which is not composed of nature. Purusha is the only one that is outside of nature, but he has got bound by nature apparently. Nature is all around him and he has identified himself with it. He thinks, I am so and so, I am the matter, the gross body, the mind. As such, he enjoys pleasure and pain, but they do not really belong to him. So, the manifest of all this nature is only for the sake of some third person. The combinations which we call nature, these constant changes that are going on are all for the experience of the soul for its liberation, so that the soul may gain experience from the lowest to the highest. When it has gained it, the soul finds that it was never in nature, that it was entirely separate, that it was indestructible, that it cannot come and go, that going to heaven and being born and dying are all in nature, never in the soul. Then the soul becomes free. So all nature is working for the enjoyment and experience of the soul. And it is getting this experience, the soul is getting this experience in order to reach the goal. And that goal is freedom. Yeah, this is what Swamiji says in such beautiful terms. Yeah. So we should always remember nature for the soul. Soul is not for the nature, for nature. We have not been born to construct buildings and factories and other things or for any other activity. We have been born just so that we can finish our experiences as early as possible and become free. Become free from all kinds of sorrows and miseries for ever and ever and ever. That is the thing. So let's end here today, and not much is left now. We've covered the important parts. I think by now we have a good idea of the Prakriti, Purusha and the Gunas, which is required for the study of the Gita. So next only some minor things remain, that the evolution and some technical terms which we should be familiar with. Because in the Upanishads and the Gita some words will come. Purusha we have already seen, like Mahat, Antakarana, Ahankara. All these are products of Prakriti, and when we study the evolution from Prakriti, subtle to gross, then these terms will come. So we should have a clear idea of what they mean. So maybe it will require 1 or 2 classes more, I think, and then it will be over. So let's stop here, I think. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.